When I was about 10 or 11, a new English teacher stepped into our classroom one afternoon and announced that we would be writing poems. Creativity, he explained, was going to be an important part of our learning process. I remember staring at the blank page for several minutes before writing my first line. It's good to be good, but not in return for food. At the time, I didn't fully understand what I meant by it. The sentence simply felt correct in the strange, instinctive ways certain thoughts do before a person is old enough to properly examine them. The poem itself was about a fictional man named Francis, someone who would only perform acts of kindness when there was something waiting for him on the other side of the gesture, some reward or some compensation. Looking back, it was probably a decent poem for someone my age, though I suspect what remained with me all these years was not the poem itself, but the question underneath it. Years later, I found myself in a life that felt suspended. I was working a job that seemed specifically engineered to make existence feel repetitive and airless. The kind of work where a person spends most of the month suppressing small desires to survive until payday, only to briefly indulge those denied cravings once money finally arrives, thereby ensuring the cycle begins all over again almost immediately. I had become very familiar with this rhythm: restraint, relief, regret, and then repetition. Around that same period, I had applied for two different jobs that promised escapes from my situation. Both informed me I had passed the necessary stages. Both assured me I would be contacted shortly. Shortly became 18 months. 18 months of checking my phone. 18 months of waking up with a vague expectation that today might finally be the day an email arrived to rearrange my circumstances into something more tolerable. I had started sleeping at strange hours. Weekends stopped feeling restful because they only served as brief reminders that Monday was approaching again. I watched people who interviewed alongside me disappear into newer and better lives while I remained exactly where I was, convincing myself that recruitment probably happened in batches and that my turn simply had not arrived yet. There is a particular exhaustion that emerges from prolonged waiting. I used to think people employed the word depression too casually. It seemed to me that ordinary sadness had become inflated by language into something more dramatic than it actually was. But during those months, I began experiencing a heaviness I could no longer dismiss so easily. It did not always appear as sadness, sometimes as numbness, and sometimes as staring at the ceiling long after waking up, because beginning the day felt psychologically heavier than remaining motionless beneath the sheets. One afternoon, roughly 2 weeks after payday, I realized I was running low on money again. I checked my account repeatedly as though the figures might somehow rearrange themselves through observation alone. There was a little under 9,000 naira remaining. The situation itself was survivable. I had endured versions of this month before. But two things happened that day. First, a friend reached out for 2,000 naira because he urgently needed help. I sent it to him. The second problem was more irrational. I had developed an intense craving for bole. Where I lived, bole was everywhere. Roasted plantains glazed with heat and smoke, served alongside grilled fish and pepper sauce dense with oil and spice. Sometimes roasted yams or sweet potatoes accompanied it. The smell alone could travel astonishing distances through the afternoon air. It attached itself to roadsides, traffic, and to people's clothing. I had not eaten it in a while, and as the day stretched onward, the craving grew increasingly difficult to ignore. Eventually, I gave up trying to resist it. The women selling bole stood beside a bend in the road not too far from my house. Before I even reached the corner, the smoke and the smell of the charred fish found me first. It was one of those familiar city atmospheres that almost cease to feel like sensory experiences after enough years around them. They become part of the environment's emotional architecture. There was a loose queue gathered around the grills when I arrived. Standing ahead of me was a boy who could not have been older than 13. There are certain expressions children wear that immediately reveal an awareness they acquire too early. His face carried the strange restraint of someone already acquainted with worry. His eyes were heavy and weary, but they had nothing to do with physical tiredness. He asked the lady for 3 small pieces of roasted yams. I remember looking at him and understanding almost immediately that whatever hunger accompanied this boy could not be resolved by 3 small pieces of yams. I checked my pockets and thought about the money I had left. At this point, my financial situation already felt unstable enough that one additional irresponsible decision no longer seemed capable of meaningfully worsening it. Madam, I said, please return his money to him. Give him more yams and add fish too. The boy thanked me quietly, collected his food, and walked away. And almost immediately, another memory surfaced. Around the same age as that boy, during the period when I wrote the poem about Francis, I often walked home from school instead of taking a motorcycle. The ride itself only lasted about 15 minutes, but the walk could take over an hour depending on how distracted my friends and I became along the way. We enjoyed those walks. They extended the day. They allowed childhood to feel briefly unconcerned with time. One afternoon during one of those treks, I stopped beside a woman selling puff puff. Puff puff is a deep fried dough often dusted lightly with sugar. I only had enough money for one piece, and as I reached out to collect it, a young woman standing nearby looked at the seller and asked, "What could one puff puff possibly do for someone?" Then she instructed the woman to give me more. I thanked her, took the puff puff, and continued my walk home. She likely forgot the interaction entirely before the day even ended, but standing beside that bole years later, watching the smoke drift into the traffic while a tired-looking boy disappeared down the road carrying food in his hands, I realized that without consciously deciding to do so, I had repeated her behavior almost exactly. While heading home, my financial reality weighed on me again, pulling me out of one stream of thought and casting me into another. Was I being ultimately irresponsible? I thought about how little money I had left. I thought about my own instability, about helping my friend earlier that day and now this thing with the boy, about the fact that people with far greater resources than mine often appeared significantly less willing to part with them. I thought about how this wasn't the first time I was doing something like this, in which I helped somebody even though it put me in a difficult situation. I thought about the universe and God, and whatever supernatural force observed our kindness and our acts, and why they didn't seem to be rewarding us fairly. I began wondering whether selfish people understood survival more clearly than the rest of us, whether morality was in some situations little more than a poor financial strategy disguised as virtue, whether the reason certain people remained trapped in difficult circumstances was that they continuously gave pieces of themselves away while more practical individuals conserved theirs. These thoughts disturbed me because some part of me suspected they might contain truth. By the time I reached home, I could feel pressure building behind my eyes. I placed the food aside and cried. Afterward, sitting alone in the quietness of the house, another possibility emerged. Maybe goodness was never transactional to begin with. Maybe kindness does not always return to us in the clean, symmetrical fashion we often desire. Maybe the reward for being kind was that you simply increase the amount of kindness in the world by opening a person's eyes to the version you introduced them to. The young woman who bought me extra puff puff did not know me. I was just an 11-year-old child she happened to encounter for some seconds on an ordinary afternoon. She expected nothing from me afterward. She would never see me again, yet her gesture continued moving through the world. Outside, nothing about my life had changed. My financial situation remained the same. The waiting remained the same, and with it, another Monday would arrive again. But the pressure inside my chest no longer felt quite as absolute. It was a hot afternoon, and I remember standing in my kitchen debating whether I should shower before eating or eat before showering, the way I always do whenever I buy a treat for myself I've been craving for a long time. Eventually, I showered first, Then I sat down with the disposable plate resting on the table in front of me and began to eat while the sounds of traffic drifted faintly through the windows. And for the first time in a while, my mind felt quiet.